Hey everyone, welcome back to another crash course. Today we are covering one of the most essential topics in JavaScript, functions. Whether you're brand new or just brushing up, this is going to be super helpful. Functions are everywhere in JavaScript, from simple scripts to complex web applications. By the end of this video, you will know how to create functions, pass data to them, and even avoid some common mistakes. So if you're ready, let us now open our VS Code and our browser as well and start coding. So I've now opened my VS Code and I've already created a folder called functions, as you can see. And this is what I'm going to be using. And you can see on the right side, I already have my browser opened. So now, before we start our topic for today, let us first create an index.html file and also create an index.js file. So these files are going to be used for different purposes. So the index.js file is going to be used for JavaScript and the index.html is for HTML, but it's only going to serve a purpose of helping us connect our JavaScript file to it. So I'll just provide some basic HTML code, and the title I'll name it as functions, as this is the topic of today, and I'll just have in an h1 of functions. So this doesn't change anything. This is just to make sure that we do not have a blank page. So now I can connect my script or my JavaScript through a script tag, and now I can give it a source. This is where I'm actually going to give the path of my JavaScript file. Now we can test if our JavaScript is working by just doing a console.log hello. So this is how I normally do it if I want to test my JavaScript if it is connected. But if you get used to this, you don't need to repeat this ever again. So I'll just go back to my HTML and I can open my HTML with now go live. So I can right click here and now open with go live. Or you can even see it under here if you have your full screen. And now you can see I have my index.html opened within my browser. Now I'm only going to be using the developer tools console so that I can be able to see whatever things I'll be printing within my JavaScript. So to open the developer tools, you just need to right click anywhere on your page and select inspect. As you can see, after selecting inspect, then you will land to your developer tools. As well, you can use a command as hitting Ctrl plus Shift plus an I for Windows laptops, and for MacBook laptops you can do command plus option and an I, and then that will open the developer tools. We don't need to use the elements, we just need to use the console. You can see if I clear the screen and reload again, you can see my hello word that I wrote within my JavaScript code is now printed here within the console. So as we saw, when you run JavaScript code in the browser, it uses a built-in JavaScript engine like V8 for Chrome specifically, since this is what we're using, which interprets and executes the codes for you. So this is what we're going to be using to run our JavaScript codes. Now let's talk about functions. So here is the simplest way to write a function, what we call the syntax. So you start with a keyword function, and after writing that word function, you now have to provide it a function name like this. I just wrote the function name in camel case and then brackets, and then you can end up with some curly braces, and inside here, this is where what your function does goes, or this is where what your function will do goes. So now let us now start writing a real function. Let us start with a simple function like a greet function. I'll just write a greet function, and inside the greet function I can just do console.log hello world like this. If now I come back to my browser and refresh, you don't see anything. The reason why you don't see anything is that a function will only run if it is called or invoked. Therefore, you need to call this function, and now you will see your print in the console, or you will see whatever you had in your console printed within the browser console. So now that is how functions work. You just need to write the keyword, the name of the function, and then some brackets, and then after the brackets you put there curly braces. Within the curly braces, this is where everything that you need your function to do goes. After writing your function, then you need to invoke it or call it. We usually call it invoke it or call it, so that it can be executed. You call it by writing its name and then giving it some brackets so that it is invoked. One of the common mistakes I see beginners make, it is defining a function but forget to call it. If you only define it, nothing happens. Always remember to call your functions to see the results. Now let us look at parameters and arguments. Let's make our function more dynamic. Imagine we want to greet different people. We can do that by using parameters. Parameters are like placeholders you put in a function definition, and arguments are the actual values you provide when calling that function. Here is an example. So our greet function, now we need to provide it with a parameter. So a placeholder that we can use within the function. Now, instead of saying hello world, we can choose to put there a name. So you can do this in two different ways. You can do this by using string concatenation, whereby you just need to write the first name or the first sentence or the first statement within some quotes, and now for the variable you don't need to put it in quotes, you just need to add it to your string. Now this is going to read hello with whatever name you give it. Now from where we call our function, now we can provide in an argument, a real value to the parameter. So now we can provide something like John. So it needs to be in strings, please. So now it needs to be a string because the name should be a string. We've seen what strings are, we've seen what numbers are, we've seen different data types. So always strings needs to be in either double quotes or single quotes or even backticks. It also works. So now this should print, or the result should be hello John, since we have provided a real value of John. So now let's see. In our console, we now see we have hello John without some spacing in between. The spacing can be provided with providing a space here. So spaces inside strings, they do count, but spaces that are outside, like here, these ones do not count. These ones are called white spaces. So another way we can do this is using template literal. So template literal work like this. You just need to remove the whole thing, and now you start with your backticks, and now within the backticks you can write anything, hello. Then after the hello, or if you want to input in a variable, then you should start with a $sign, then two curly braces, you put in your variable. So remember, a parameter is considered as a variable. It's already defined because you're going to provide it a value within the invocation. You're going to provide it an argument. So that one is like, that parameter is already like defined. Therefore, you can use it as the normal way we use a variable. So now this is going to be the same. You can see it here. It already printed hello John. Now, as we say that functions can be reused, this is one of the main functions or the main importances of using a function. So we can now reuse it by greeting maybe somebody else called Mark. So we can put in Mark as an argument. We can see now here we have hello Mark. We can put in even other arguments by just reusing the function, like hello maybe Jolie, something like this. You can obviously see it within our browser. So to cut this short, John, Mark, and Jolie, these are what we call arguments, and name here, this is what we call a parameter. So this is one of the common mistakes most of the developers do, mixing up parameters and arguments. Please do remember that the two are different. Parameters are part of a function, like the way we have the name here, and now arguments are the real values that we pass into a function when we are calling it, as we did here. These are some of the small things, but getting the terminology right will always help you in advance, and most of the times it will help you within your interview. Now let us look at what we call returning values from functions. So the return keyword is very important in functions. Now let us clear our screen and we use a return keyword and see how it works. Let us now give another example of adding two numbers. So a function of adding two numbers is like this. Function, maybe let us call it add numbers. So the numbers, we just give it some parameters of A and B. And now we can give more than one parameter, two parameter, and so on. So now we sometimes need to return a value. As we've seen it in the first function, we were just printing some value or some statement within the console. But sometimes you might need to do something more than printing, like maybe returning a value, and that value can be used after or later, not within the function. Now let us see, we need to return now the sum of the two numbers A plus B. We are returning them because we shall need to use the result of this outside our function. Now if we want to use them outside our function, we can maybe just say constant result is equal to the function invoked and passing in the arguments. Let us say our arguments are 5 and 3, and the summation of this should be 8. Now I just wrote the function wrongly. I just missed an S. So now we can console.log the result from the above function by just doing console.log result, and now you can see our result is 8. So we use the return keyword so that we can return the result got from here, that is to say A plus B. And now we had to store our result into a variable called result, and now we had to console it to our console of our browser. Sometimes beginners or new developers write a function to do something but forget to include the return statement. This causes functions to run but give you no results and might give you some error. Let us see if we remove this keyword, and we see we are now getting undefined, which means there is no result being outputted. Therefore, return keyword is very, very important in functions. And another thing that I need to tell you, you don't put anything right after the return keyword. Let's say if we put there something like console.log, maybe hello. So you can see how this console looks like. It looks dim, which means if you hover on it, they will tell you unreachable code detected. So any code you write after the return keyword, it won't be executed. It won't be reachable. Therefore, if we bring this up here, you can see it will now be executed, as you can see in our console browser. Let me try to zoom in our console browser. As you can see now in our console browser, we are able to console the hello. But if you bring it below the return, you won't see anything. That code won't be reachable. Continuing with our functions, let us look at what we call anonymous functions. These are functions that don't have a name, and you typically pass them as arguments to other functions. So the reason why we can use anonymous functions is for us to be able to pass them as arguments to other functions. How does this work? Let me give you an example. In JavaScript, we have some built-in functions like set timeout. So what set timeout does, it runs or executes if and only the time set within the function reaches. So let us write set timeout, we invoke it or call it, and then we want to pass in another function. If we want to pass in another function, we will just have an anonymous function or a function without a name. Therefore, if it is without a name, we will just write function as the keyword, and then we just have curly braces like that. Then inside there, we can have in whatever we need to console. Maybe we can have in this message is delayed by 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, this is when it is going to be invoked. So before we even look at our browser console, let us first make sure that we write this set timeout. If we hover on the set timeout, we can see that we will get some descriptions. So it usually has a callback, which is that anonymous function, and also a number parameter, which is in milliseconds. So that number parameter, you can see this is our first argument. It ends up to here. Then we can add the second parameter, which is 2000. 2000 will mean it means milliseconds, remember. So 2000 means that it is 2 seconds. So this means that after 2 seconds, we should see this printed message. So let me clear the screen and reload, and we wait for 2 seconds. You can see after 2 seconds, this function will now console this message. If we put there 3 and then reload, we can see that after 3 seconds, a message now should appear. So I forgot to change this one. So if we change this one, we can now see that a message will appear after 3 seconds. So let me show you how you can have default parameters. If we have a function of greet, and we just have to put in some parameters, let's say a parameter of name, and now inside here we can choose to say, maybe we can choose to console.log my name is. So let me now use again the backticks. So I'll just take off this, and now I'll just say my name is name, like this. And now we need to call or invoke the function by passing in a name. Let's say we don't pass in a name like this, we just need to pass in a name like King, maybe. My name is King. You can see it here in the console. Let's say we want to give it a default name. So giving it a default name, we come to the parameter and equate it to some default name we want. Let us say my name is John is the default. That is what you want to be the default. So in case there is no argument provided, it will pick up that default. If I remove King, you can see it is now my name is John. It is getting this default name from the parameter. But if I put there another name, maybe Susan, so it will override the default name. So you can use defaults, but again, if you provide an argument to your function, it will override your default name. Now let us try to look at least maybe two parameters, and where 2 parameters, all of them have default parameters. So let me say a function of area of rectangle. So this function should usually have the parameter of length and width. And now we can call it like this. I mean, we can have curly braces like this. Let me try to decrease this. And now we are going to return its area. So remember, the area will be length times width. So now we can, the width was written wrongly. Now we can provide there just some brackets to make it more clear. Now we can invoke this function, and we can make sure we provide some arguments like maybe 3 and 6. 3 and 6. Now we can also store this in maybe a variable called result. Now if we come and console this, let me try again to decrease this. If we come and console.log this result, you can see now our result, this 3 will come and replace the length, and this 6 will come and replace the width. Then this is going to be 3 times 6, which is going to be 18, which is the area of a rectangle. So let us now try to see how we can provide the defaults. So if we remove these parameters, and now we need to provide the defaults, otherwise we shall get not a number. So if we provide the defaults, we shall come, let me try to enlarge this once again. We shall come here to the length and give it maybe a value of 10, and the width maybe give it a value of 20. So you can obviously see that we gave them some defaults. I hope you can see that. So this is now going to be 10 times 20, which is going to be 200, which is the area of that rectangle. And you can see we didn't provide any arguments, but it is using the default arguments. But let's say we want to provide now arguments, which means they will override the default arguments. Let me just try to put there a 5. So if I put there a 5, we are getting 100. Where is the 100 coming from? So if we put there one argument and yet we are having two parameters, even though they have defaults, but always this 5 we have here will be for this first parameter, which means our length is going to be 5. Then 5 times 20, this is what we get, 100, right? If we want to say that this 5 stands for the width, and you see the width is the second parameter. Let me try to enlarge this so that you can see it clearly. Let me also do this. So if we want to provide now our 5 to be for the width, you can see the width is the second parameter. Therefore, we need to provide something to cater for this first parameter. Then we need to put there undefined. If we put there undefined and the comma, this undefined will be for the length, and this one will be for the width. But because the length has a default one, now it will use the other 10 instead of undefined. Undefined is like we didn't provide a value for it. Therefore, it will use 10 since we didn't provide the value for it. And now this is going to be 10 times this 5, which stands for the width. Then that is going to result into 50. So that is how we use default parameters. And we can either omit to use the default totally by not giving arguments to the function. If we give arguments to the function, they will override the default parameters. But again, if we only want to provide one value, we should leave out the rest with undefined. The same applies to also the second value. We can just have a 5 here and put where 5 is undefined. So now, as we are wrapping, let's first look at arrow functions. So this is another syntax or another way of writing our functions. So arrow functions were introduced in the modern JavaScript version, which is ECMAScript 6 or ES6. You remember we learned about ES. So ECMAScript, these are standards of JavaScript. So within the standard of JavaScript 6, that is when arrow functions were introduced. These let us or let you or will let you write functions in a shorter way. So here is an add function which is written in the normal function way. So this is going to be function. We can even choose to do anonymous. Let's say constant add numbers. So we're just storing it in a variable, and then we can just do function. Then we can just do, instead of using a, let us use num1 and num2. And now this one will have a return because we need to use this result, of course. Return num1 plus num2. So this is how we can write it using normal ways of functions. But in ES6, this is how we do comments in JavaScript. So in ES6, we have what we call arrow functions. So this is going to be written as add numbers, and now we are going to have brackets, and within the brackets we are going to put in our arguments num1 and num2. Then here we put an arrow. So this is where it came from, the name being arrow function. So now we put there our brackets, and now we can return num1 plus num2. Of course, you can also put there brackets to make sure that your function is well written. But again, you can omit them. That one will still work. So now, you can see we have two functions, of course, even though they have two names and they are telling us they are redeclared. So we can say this is format, add numbers format 1, then add numbers format 2. Like this, so that we have two different names. So if we want to console this, we can do console.log. Now we can invoke the first function and pass in some values, 2 plus 4, and now we can see no, not 2 plus 4, 2 and 4 separated by a comma. Now we can see it's a 6, or we can choose to give them defaults. Let us choose to give them defaults so that you will understand how defaults work. I'm giving it defaults of 2 and 4. Now I can remove the arguments. I'll still get the 6 because we have the defaults of 2 and 4. I will also leave this one without defaults because I want to provide it with some arguments. Now you can see the two functions have 3 lines, but the arrow function is not yet made shorter. So guess what? We can remove this, the last curly brace. We can also remove this. We can as well remove the return keyword and have it all on one line. Do you see that this is on one line while these ones are on 3 lines? This is what arrow functions are there for. So they give you a shorter syntax to write your function. Now if we come here and console.log, let me maybe delete this or comment it out. Now we do console.log, add numbers, format 2 because we're using arrow function. Now we give it some arguments like 2 and 6. We can see we get an 8. So this function is the one that is now working. So this is how we write this longer function format to a shorter one, which is now called arrow functions. So please, from now on, our next crash courses, we shall be using arrow functions. So please get used to this, get used to the formatting and the syntax in general, so that you can well write shorter codes for your functions. So we've covered named functions, anonymous functions, arrow functions, parameters and arguments. We have also looked at the return keyword, which helps us return a value that we can use later on. And we even saw some common mistakes to avoid. Please remember, functions are everywhere in our JavaScript, and knowing them and making sure you understand how they work will make your coding life much easier. If you found this video helpful, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more crash courses. Please do share the link, and I'll see you in our next crash course. Happy coding to everyone. See you.